Hello and welcome to the Target UPSC Prelims 2024 series, and this is the current affairs episode, and the subject that we will be covering today is economy, and this is the third episode of economy. So let's begin. First is the RBI's regulation for UCBs. When we say UCB, it means the Urban Cooperative Banks. So RBI's regulation on UCB. So to strengthen 1514 urban cooperative banks, the RBI, which is the Central Bank of India, so the Reserve Bank of India has notified 4 key measures. So 4 key measures has been notified by the RBI, and including giving them 2 years more to meet the priority sector lending targets. So to meet the priority sector lending, popularly known as the PSL, 2 more years have been given to meet the targets. Then what are the key measures taken by the RBI? So 4 key measures has been taken by the RBI, and that is, first is allowing the urban cooperative banks to open new branches. So opening of new branches of the urban cooperative banks without prior approval from the RBI, up to 10% or maximum of 5 branches of the number of branches in the previous financial year. So it means that till now, for opening of the branch of the urban cooperative bank, what needs to be done? Prior approval of the RBI needs to be taken. But now maximum of 5 branches or 10% of the branches that can be opened without taking prior approval from the RBI. Like for example, if any bank has 50 branches, then maximum of 5 or 10%. So this becomes 5 branches. So while opening 5 more branches, UCB do not have to take the permission of the RBI. Like for example, you can say if any has 100 branches, then 10% becomes 10. So this will not be 10 new branches, this will be 5 new branches, because the maximum branches that can be opened is 5. Second key measure is allowing UCBs to do one-time settlement at par with the commercial banks. So like the other scheduled commercial banks, they can do the one-time settlement. It means that in one go settlement can be done. So UCBs will also be getting this facility. Third, extending the timeline for UCBs to achieve priority sector lending targets by 2 more years up to March 2026. So to achieve the PSL targets, 2 more years is given to them. Then notifying a nodal officer for closer coordination and focused interaction between RBI and the cooperative sector. So for the coordination of RBI and the cooperative sector, a nodal officer will be placed. So these are the 4 measures. Then what can be the possible effects with regard to it? So these initiatives will further strengthen the urban cooperative banks which work in urban areas and were facing hardships in achieving the priority sector lending targets. So strengthening of the UCBs will be done through these measures. Then the Ministry of Cooperation is committed to strengthening cooperatives and treating them at par with other forms of economic entities. So as of now, what can be seen that the urban cooperative banks has less power as compared to all other banking entities or economic entities. But the aim with regard to the changes that has been made or the measures that has been taken, so the Ministry of Cooperation wants to strengthen the urban cooperative banks and treat them equally like other entities. Now what is cooperative banks in India? Cooperative banks. Cooperative banks is a portion from where the questions can be asked, and priority sector lending in itself is a very important topic. So it is an institution established on a cooperative basis to deal with ordinary banking business. So the ordinary banking business can be dealt with UCBs. And cooperative banks are founded by collecting funds through shares, accepting deposits and granting loans. And they are cooperative credit societies where members from a community group together to extend loans to each other at favorable terms. So the community group, members from a community group, they come together and then they extend loans to each other. It means that of one community, people will come together, then people will give money. If anyone would need loan, then they can take it. If anyone has excess money, then they can provide the loan. They are registered under the Cooperative Societies Act of the state, Cooperative Societies Act of the state concerned, or the Multi-State Cooperative Societies Act of the year 2002. So they are registered under this. This is an important point. Then the cooperative banks are governed by the Banking Regulation Act 1949 and Banking Laws Cooperative Societies Act 1955. This point can be asked in the examination and also important with regard to the mains answer writing. Then comes next, and this is the expected credit loss based loan loss provisioning norms. See, don't get confused in the name. Expected credit loss. So what is the loss that a bank can expect based loan loss provisioning norms? So if there is any expectation that the credit which the bank has given can turn into loss, so on the basis of this, provisioning norms can be made. So recently the RBI said that the banks will be given ample time to implement the ECL based loan loss provisioning norms. ECL is expected credit loss. So expected credit loss based loan loss provisioning norms, what is it? About its background. So the RBI has previously proposed the adoption of this approach for credit impairment, and banks were given a 1 year period for implementation once the final guidelines are released. So what will it help in doing is that the credit impairment or the losses which the banks were making, like for example the NPAs, the loans which were turning into NPAs, so it will help in preventing its impairment. And while the final guidelines are yet to be announced, so the final guidelines has not been announced till now, it is expected that it may be notified by fiscal year 2024 for implementation starting from 2025. But till now it has not been done. The Indian Banks Association, that is IBA, it has requested the RBI to grant an additional year for lenders to prepare for the implementation of the ECL norms. So already 1 year period was given, but the Indian Banks Association has asked for 1 more year. RBI has proposed a framework for adopting an expected loss based approach for provisioning by banks in case of loan defaults, and under this banks will need to classify financial assets into one of the 3 categories. So what happens is that provisioning needs to be done. Like for example, if the bank knows that any loan that they have given is making losses, or it is turning into NPA, or is not being repaid, then what will happen is then bank needs to take care of it. So it can take care of it from the money that the banks have, or the shock absorbent needs to be prepared by the bank. So a provision in advance needs to be taken. So let's talk about the asset classification, that is stage 1 asset. These are financial assets that have not experienced a significant increase in credit risk since their initial recognition. So the credit risk has not been experienced with this. Then stage 2 assets. So these are financial instruments that have undergone a significant increase in credit risk. So the credit risk is there. Then stage 3 assets. These are financial assets that have objective evidence of impairment at the reporting date. So evidence is also there that the credit impairment or the credit risk has taken place. So these are three different stages of assets. What can be the benefit of this? The expected credit losses approach will enhance the resilience of the banking system in line with globally accepted standards. Resilience, because if the banks in the starting, or if the banks is prepared to take the shock of the losses that can be made, so if in advance our system can be prepared or provisions can be taken in advance, then the banks will be in a better position to deal with the situation. It is expected to result in higher provisions compared to the shortfall seen under the incurred loss approach. So provisioning will increase, or the higher provisions will be taken. Then comes the evergreening of loans. So next point is the evergreening of loans. So the governor of the Reserve Bank of India has recently addressed the bank boards and expressed concerns about the banks adopting over-aggressive growth strategies and engaging in the evergreening of loans. So it can be seen that the banks are now moving towards aggressive growth strategies and they are engaging in the evergreening of the loans, and this can create problem for the banking sector. And the governor has emphasized the need for robust corporate governance and highlighted instances of concealing the true status of stressed loans. So stressed loans are the loans which are not coming back to the banks. Then what is the evergreening of loans? So the point about that the evergreening of loans is increasing. So what is it is all about? So evergreening loans, a form of zombie lending, is a practice of extending new or additional loans to a borrower who is unable to repay the existing loans, thereby concealing the true status of the non-performing assets or bad loans. What happens is, imagine this is a person who has taken a loan of 5 lakh rupees from the bank. So the person is not able to repay the 5 lakh rupees, the loan that the person has taken, back to the bank. But again, the person has come to take a loan of 2 lakh rupees. Now imagine the situation that the person is already not being able to pay the existing loan, but the second loan has also been given to it. So this first existing loan is not coming. Now imagine the situation if the second loan the person has taken is also not coming back. So this will create a problem. Now approaches utilized for evergreening loans. Selling and buyback loans or debt instruments between two lenders to avoid classifying them as NPAs. Now many times what is being done is that the second loan that the buyer is taking, that the person will take the second loan and then repay the first loan. Then the first loan will get cancelled and then the second loan will work. So this is not a sustainable approach. Persuading good borrowers to enter into structured deals with stressed borrowers to hide their defaults. Using internal or office account to adjust the repayment obligations of borrowers, or renewing or disbursing new loans to stressed borrowers or related entities closer to the repayment date of earlier loans. So what can be done with regard to is, when this is done, second loan is taken to repay the first loan. Now what happens is that in the bank's notebook, or that the first loan gets cancelled or the first loan gets repaid. But what happens is that now the second loan will start. So if the person is not able to repay the first loan and the second loan has been given to him or her, then the second loan might not be repaid. So this will create a problem in the banking structure. Now, loan write-off versus evergreening. So loan write-offs are a process of removing bad loans from the books of banks after making adequate provisions for them. Now what happens is, imagine the first loan is being repaid by the second loan. So the first loan will be removed from the books and then second loan will work. Then loan write-offs do not mean that the borrowers are relieved of their repayment. So it does not mean that the repayment has not been done by the borrower. Then loan write-offs are done to clean up the balance sheet of banks and reflect their true financial position. So just to clean up the balance sheet, because it shows that the repayment is being done. Evergreening of loans, on the other hand, is a practice of extending new or additional loans to a borrower who is unable to pay the existing loans, thereby concealing the true status of the non-performing assets or bad loans. Then what is a non-performing asset? That we keep on hearing the word in news, that is the NPAs. So what actually NPA is? So NPA refers to a classification of loans or advances that are in default or in arrears. So the loan which people has taken from the bank but is not able to repay back to the bank is what turns into the non-performing asset. Banks are required to classify non-performing assets. So there are different types of non-performing assets. So first one is the substandard assets. Substandard assets classified as an NPA for a period less than or equal to 12 months. So a loan, if not coming for a period of less than or equal to 12 months, then it is called substandard assets. Then second is the doubtful assets, non-performing for a period exceeding 12 months. Exceeding 12 months. So till 12 months substandard, exceeding 12 months doubtful. Then loss assets are uncollectible and where there is little or no hope for recovery, and that needs to be fully written off. Fully written off means that this loan does not have any chances of coming back. Then next topic, that is the limits on UPI transaction. So UPI transactions are increasing in number and people are making a lot of payments through the UPI transactions. So limits on UPI transactions. With record rise in unified payment interface transactions, UPI stands for the Unified Payments Interface Transactions. So the banks and UPI apps have decided to impose day limits on UPI transactions. So day limits is what is being proposed to be imposed on top of the limits set by the NPCI in 2021. So NPCI has set few limits, and on top of this, banks and UPI apps, they have also decided to impose daily limits on UPI transactions. Now, what limits have been imposed on UPI transactions? Now, limits by NPCI. So what NPCI has imposed? Users can make up to 20 transactions of 1 lakh in a single day. Single day, that is 24 hours. 20 transactions or 1 lakh in a single day. 24 hours, 20 transactions or 1 lakh rupees. Then certain specific category of transactions such as capital market, collection, insurance, forward, inward remittances, they have a higher limit of 2 lakh. Then for UPI based ASBA, that is application supported by blocked amount system, IPO and retail direct schemes, the limit for each transaction was increased to 5 lakh in the year 2021. So it is basically, you have to remember the single day, 24 hours, 20 transactions or 1 lakh rupees. Now what is the significance of limits? This was about the limits. What is the significance of limits? The imposition of limits helps maintain the security infrastructure of UPI and ensures its seamless functioning. So security infrastructure will be improved of the UPI with regard to the limits being placed on them, and the seamless functioning, it will also help in the seamless functioning of the UPI. Then limits assist in preventing potential fraud and risk concerns. So when the limits are placed, then transactions needs to be done with regard to those limits. So it will also prevent frauds from happening. Then higher limits are set up for specific categories with higher average transaction values, such as capital market or credit card bill payments. So with it is not that a single limit will be placed on everything. It will be seen that if there is any category which needs the limit to be higher, then with regard to it the higher limits will be placed. Like for example, the capital market, the business accounts, they need higher limits. Then recent trends observed with respect to the UPI. If we talk about the May 2023, then total number of transactions facilitated using UPI reached 9,415 million with a combined value of 14.89 lakh crore. So this shows that how much people are using UPI for transactions. Then the share of P2P, P2P stands for peer-to-peer transactions among total UPI transaction is about 43%, while the P2M, that is peer to merchant, so that is P2P, that is peer to peer, it means one person to another person, it is about 43%, and P2M is about 50 to 55%. In the P2P category, the majority of transactions were in the below 500 bracket, while in the P2M category the share in the same amount bracket was 84.3. So the amount which people are majorly dealing is, that is below 500 rupees. Now what is NPCI? NPCI stands for the National Payment Corporation of India. Now what is National Payment Corporation of India? So it is an umbrella organization. Umbrella organization means that it looks into many other things also. So it is an umbrella organization for operating retail payments and settlement systems in India. So whatever are the settlement system in India and the retail payments, so NPCI looks into its operation. Then it is an initiative of the Reserve Bank of India and the Indian Banks Association. So NPCI is Reserve Bank of India plus India Bank Association under the provisions of the Payment and Settlement System Act of 2007. It is incorporated as a non-profit company, not-for-profit company, under the provisions of Section 25 of the Companies Act 1956. Now the 10 core promoter banks are, so there are few of the core promoter banks for NPCI, and that is the State Bank of India, Punjab National Bank, Canara Bank, Bank of Baroda, Union Bank of India, ICICI Bank, HDFC Bank, Citi Bank and HSBC. In the year 2016, the shareholding was broad-based to 56 member banks to include more banks representing all sectors. So the shareholding of NPCI was between 56 member banks. Now comes next, and that is the Indian startup ecosystem. So how is the Indian startup ecosystem performing? Now why was this in news? So according to slowdown in India's startup ecosystem, because a lot of rush could be seen with regard to the India's startup ecosystem during the time of 2020, 21, 22. Now a slowdown is observed and new additions in the coveted unicorn list declined sharply. So the unicorns in India are also declining in number, indicating a slowdown in the Indian startup ecosystem. So India added only 3 unicorn startups having a valuation of over 1 billion in 2023. So in the year 2023, only 3 unicorn companies were added as against 24 in the 2022. So in the year 2022, 24 unicorns were added, while in the year 2023 only 3 unicorns were added. When we talk about unicorns, so unicorn companies are those companies which makes a business of more than 1 billion USD. So the valuation has to be more than 1 billion. what is the scenario of the startup ecosystem in India? Scenario in India. So India has emerged as the third largest ecosystem for startups globally. Third largest. It means that India is also producing a lot of startups, and when startups are produced, employment is also generated. Now, India ranks second in innovation quality. Innovation quality, India is ranked second as we produce a lot of engineers, scientists, with top positions in the quality of scientific publications and the quality of its universities. Then Indian startup ecosystem has seen exponential growth in past few years, that is with regard to 2015 to the time period of 2022. 15x increase in the total funding of startups, 9x increase in the number of investors, and 7x increase in the number of incubators. Even the culture of startups is now being accepted by the people, and people nowadays are moving towards becoming the entrepreneurs, and they now aim to become entrepreneurs and start their own startup. Then as of May 2023, India is home to 108 unicorns with a total valuation of 340.80 billion. So till the year 2023, India has 108 unicorns. Now, what are the terms related to startups? So terms related to startups, first is decacorn. So decacorn means current valuation of over USD 10 billion. So a company whose valuation is more than 10 billion, that is called decacorn. Then comes unicorn. Startups founded after the year 2000 with a valuation of USD 1 billion. So 1 billion or plus valuation is unicorn, 10 billion and plus valuation is decacorn. Then gazelles, startups that are mostly likely to go unicorn in the next 3 years. So startups who are not unicorn as of now, but in the coming 3 years, they will be in the category of unicorns, or they have the capacity to be in the category of unicorns. Then cheetahs, startups that could go unicorn in the next 5 years. So startups that has the capability or the capacity to become unicorn in the coming 5 years are cheetahs, in the coming 3 years are gazelles. Then challenges faced by Indian startups. So what are the different types of challenges that Indian startup face? First and foremost is the funding challenges. So they need funding and they are looking for investors, be it in the country or from abroad. So, and as of now, we see that there is a funding crunch in the market going on. So the funding challenge is the biggest challenge which is faced by a startup. Revenue generation struggles. So even if a startup has started, now startup to run for a long period of time needs to generate its own business, needs to generate its own capital and money, because a startup without generating its own revenue cannot run for a very long period of time on funding. Then lack of supportive infrastructure. This can become a very big problem, that the infrastructure which the startup needs might not be provided to it or might not be given to it. Regulatory environment and tax structures. Tax structure should be in favor of the startups, or tax structure should be made in such a way that it promotes startups, and regulatory environment so that the startups can work freely in the ecosystem. Now next topic is the point of greedflation. So it is greed plus inflation is equals to greedflation, and it is basically with regard to the MNCs or the big companies or the capitalist class or the rich and wealthy people. So recently there has been an increasing consensus in Europe and the United States of America that greedflation is driving the rising cost of living rather than just inflation. So it is not inflation which is rising the cost in the market or rising the standard of living or the living cost of people. especially with regard to the developed countries like the US and the European countries. To understand greedflation, it is important to know how inflation works. So, rising cost of living and inflation is what is also caused by the capitalist class, and that leads to greedflation. Let's understand first of all about inflation. So what are the causes of inflation? First is the cost push inflation, that the cost of an item pushes the inflation. Prices get pushed up because input cost has risen, that the raw material of a product, the cost of it rises. Like for example, if crude oil prices went up by 10% overnight because of a supply disruption, then the general price level will be pushed up because energy costs have gone up. Because the crude oil prices increases, that is why the energy price also increases. Then demand pull inflation, the demand in the market is because of which the inflation happens. So prices are pulled up because there is excess demand in the market. For example, if RBI cuts interest rates sharply, so interest rates are cut by RBI, making people buy a house quite affordable. Since the interest rate has fallen, then the sudden surge in demand for new houses will pull up home prices. Because when something in the market is in limited form and there are many buyers of it, so the demand, because the demand is very high, the cost or the prices will go up. Then now let's talk about what is greedflation. So greedflation is about, it refers to the situation where corporate greed drives inflation. So it is the corporate sector, it is the capitalist class, it is the rich and the elite class which drives inflation. Rather than a wage price spiral, it is a profit price spiral. So greedflation is because of the corporates, and it is about the profit price spiral, that more and more profit is generated by the corporates, where companies exploit inflation by raising prices excessively. So this is a product and the price of the product is raised excessively, going beyond covering their increased cost and aiming to maximize their profit margins. So the price is increasing even though the input cost, has been covered and certain level of profits have also been made, but still if there is demand, so the price of the product will be raised many folds. So this is done with the aim of maximizing the profit margins. These further fuels inflation. So making much more profit than what is expected is what is called greedflation. And the maximizing of profit is done because the prices are increased, and this is done with regard to the greed of the corporates to earn more profits, and that is why it is called greedflation. Now scenario, during crises like natural disasters or pandemics, prices often surge as businesses raise them due to increased input costs. However, in some cases, businesses exploit the situation by making excessive profits through significantly higher price markups. Now, imagine the case if there is a product which is in the market, the demand for the product is very high, and due to some situation the demand is very high and the product is very limited in the market, so the price of the product will go up. Then comes its impact. So greedflation disproportionately impacts low income and middle class individuals, reducing their consumption and lowering their standard of living, because the prices will go up, so the inflation will increase, and this will impact the low income and the middle class individuals, while it benefits the wealthy by increasing the value of their assets. And with regard to this, the widening of the wealth gap between the rich and the poor keeps on increasing, and income inequality also rises. Then sharp price increases and speculation driven by greed can create bubbles and unsustainable market conditions, because this will not be very sustainable if the prices will be very high. This makes financial markets more susceptible to crashes and crises, posing risk to overall economic stability. So the economic stability will be at risk if the greedflation goes for a very long period of time. Then inflationary pressures caused by greedflation can result in divergent policy among countries, because each country will form different policy to deal with a situation with regard to the situation of the greedflation. Now next, what is the wage price spiral, and this will be the last topic of today. So what is the wage price spiral? So what happens when prices rise? So if the prices in the market rise, what will happen? The workers who are working, they will demand higher wages. So when they will demand higher wages, they will have more money in their pockets. So as a result, inflation worsens because there is more money in the market, because higher wages lead to increased purchasing power. If people will have more money in their pocket, then the consumption that they will do, or the spending on consumption that they will do, will also increase, which drives up prices. So central banks raise interest rates. So interest rates is also raised to reduce economic activity and demand, which can result in job losses. So this is what creates a problem, and this is why it is called a wage price spiral. Because if the wages of the people will increase, it means that there is more money in the pocket of people, and if there is more money, then they will spend more, and if they will spend more, then more money will come into the market, and because of which the inflation will increase and the prices will also go up. So if the prices will go up, then the RBI will have to increase the interest rate, so that the loan cannot be taken by the people, and the economy or the market has limited money or limited cash flow. So the economic activity needs to be reduced with that regard, and the economic activity and the demand decreases, and which might cause job losses, or which will cause job losses, and that is why it is called a wage price spiral. That is why it is called a spiral, because this creates a problem. So this was the last topic of today. So we covered in overall wage price spiral. Then we talked about greedflation. Then we talked about Indian startup ecosystem. Then limits on UPI transactions. Then it was evergreening of loans. Then expected credit loss based loan loss provisioning norms. Then RBI's regulation for UCBs. So this was the episode 3 of economy, and we will cover more topics in the coming episodes. So that's all for today. Thank you so much for watching. Till we meet next time, keep reading, keep writing, and keep subscribing to the channel. Thank you.
For more informative content, like, share and subscribe, and do not forget to press the bell icon to get the notifications.